The envelope was the wrong color. That's what I noticed first. Everything else at the table was champagne and gold and white linen, all of it staged for the photograph my mother had hired someone to take. But the envelope she slid across the tablecloth toward me was a flat, industrial gray, the kind of envelope a hospital sends when someone has died. I had just turned the tassel on my graduation cap 2 hours earlier. My cap and gown were folded over the back of my chair. I was 26 years old, and I had paid for every credit hour myself, and my mother had insisted on a celebration dinner at a steakhouse on the river because, as she'd put it on the phone, we should make some kind of fuss, even if it's only a master's. Even if it's only a master's. That was the phrase. I should have known then. I had finished my MBA that morning, with distinction. The stage announcer had stumbled over my last name, and my mother had laughed, audibly, in the third row. I want to tell you about the envelope, though, because everything starts with the envelope. I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. There was no name on the front. My father, who hadn't said a full sentence to me since I'd sat down, was staring at his water glass like it was a quiz he hadn't studied for. My older sister, the perfect one, had her phone propped against the salt shaker, the camera already aimed at my face. She'd done that earlier too, when the appetizers came. I thought she was filming her plate for the food blog she was always threatening to start. She was not filming her plate. "Open it, sweetheart," my mother said. Her voice had the bright, brittle quality of someone announcing a raffle winner. "Your father and I have been talking about this for a long time. We thought tonight was the right night." My grandmother was the only person at the table who looked uncomfortable. She had flown in from Pensacola that morning, 90 years old and still wearing her good shoes, and she was watching my mother with the particular flat stare she usually reserved for telemarketers. She reached across the table and put her hand on top of mine. She didn't say anything. She just squeezed once, hard, and let go. I opened the envelope. I wanted to be honest about what I felt in the first 5 seconds, because it wasn't what you'd think. It wasn't shock. It wasn't even pain, not at first. It was a kind of cold administrative relief, the same feeling you get when a doctor finally puts a name to the symptom you've been carrying around for years. The papers were notarized. They were dated 3 weeks earlier. My father had signed them. My mother had signed them. My sister had signed them. There was even a line from my brother-in-law, who was not present and who had not, to my knowledge, been a member of this family for the 7 years he'd been married into it. He had signed, too. The header was in bold, centered, all caps. Notice of familial disassociation and disinheritance. Underneath, in smaller font, a single sentence: "The undersigned hereby formally and irrevocably renounce all familial, financial, and emotional obligations to the named individual, effective immediately." The named individual was me. My sister's phone was steady. She had a small, expectant smile on her face, the kind you wear at a surprise party right before the lights come on. My mother had her hands folded under her chin like a girl in a yearbook photo. My father was still staring at the water glass. "We thought it would be cleaner this way," my mother said. "More mature. You've made it very clear over the years that our values aren't your values. We didn't want there to be confusion later. About the house, about the trust, about the holidays. We're giving you a fresh start. From all of us. From all of us." She kept saying that. From all of us. As if the whole thing were a group card she'd had everyone sign at the office. I want to tell you what I did, but first I have to tell you about the 4 years before this dinner, or none of it makes sense. I had been the family disappointment since I was 15. I won't bore you with the whole inventory, but the highlight reel goes like this. I was the one who got into the state school instead of the private one. I was the one who studied logistics instead of the private one. I was the one who studied logistics instead of medicine, finance, or law. I was the one who, at 22, told my mother I wasn't going to marry the son of her bridge partner, even though she had already booked the venue. I was the one who moved out of the family compound in the suburbs of Charleston and rented a studio above a dry cleaner in a part of the city my father called, with a straight face, the wrong side of every river. My sister, 3 years older, had done all of it correctly, the right school, the right husband, the right specialty. She was a pediatric dentist, which my mother described to strangers in a tone usually reserved for canonized saints. She lived in a 4-bedroom on the same street as my parents. She drove the right car. She had 2 children with the right names, and she had begun, in the last year, to bring those children into conversations about me as if they were exhibits at a trial. "I don't want my kids to think this is what success looks like," she'd said at Easter, gesturing at my outfit, which was a perfectly normal navy blazer. What none of them knew, what I had been very careful for none of them to know, was that for the past 4 years I had been building something. I had taken my undergraduate logistics degree and a tiny line of credit and a 6-month leave from a corporate gig that paid just enough to keep me alive, and I had built a regional freight optimization platform. The kind of thing nobody at my mother's bridge club would have understood if I'd drawn them a diagram. We didn't move boxes. We didn't own trucks. We sold an algorithm that told other people's trucks where to go and what to carry and how to fill the empty space on the way back. I had 2 co-founders. We had bootstrapped it for the first 18 months out of a shared co-working space near the port. We had landed our first real client, a mid-sized grocery chain, the same week I started the MBA program at night. By the end of my first year, we had 4 clients. By the end of the second year, we had a Series A and a small office and a team of 9. By the start of my final semester, we were the back-end logistics partner for a regional retailer you have heard of, even if you've never thought about how the lettuce gets to the store. 6 weeks before my graduation, we had been acquired. Not in the way you read about in the headlines. We weren't a unicorn. The acquisition was a strategic one, a quiet deal between us and a publicly traded supply chain company headquartered in Atlanta. The check was real, but more importantly, the role was real. As part of the deal, I had been named Senior Vice President of Network Strategy for the parent company, with my own division, my own P&L, and a seat on the executive committee. The press release had gone out the previous Monday. It had been picked up in a small way by 2 industry trade publications and the business section of the Charleston paper. My family, who as far as I could tell did not read the business section of anything, had not seen it. I had not told them. I had not told them because 3 years earlier, when I had first mentioned that I was working on something with 2 friends, my mother had laughed at the dinner table and said, in front of my father and my sister and my sister's husband, "Oh, sweetheart, you're not the type." And then she had passed the rolls. And I had decided, in that exact second, with the rolls in my hand, that the next time my family heard about my work, it would not be from me. So I sat at that steakhouse on the river with my master's degree 2 hours old and an executive title 1 week old and my sister's phone trained on my face, and I read the Disownment papers all the way through. I read the legal language. I read the legal language. I read the notary stamp. I read the line where my own name had been printed, my full legal name, and I noticed they had spelled my middle name wrong. They had been my parents for 26 years, and they had spelled my middle name wrong on the document terminating their parenthood. I started laughing. I want to be clear about what kind of laugh it was. It wasn't hysterical. It wasn't angry. It was the laugh you laugh when you walk out of a long, bad meeting and realize the person you were trying to please was never going to be pleased. My sister's smile faltered. The phone dipped half an inch. "Honey," my mother said, "this is a serious moment." "I know," I said. I was still laughing a little. I had to wipe my eye with the back of my hand. "I know it is. I'm sorry. Could I have a pen?" That threw her. She blinked at me. "A pen? To sign," I said. "I want to sign," I said. "I want to sign. I want to make it official. From all of us," you said. "I want my signature on it too." My father looked up from the water glass for the first time. He had the expression of a man who has been told the elevator he is in is about to drop. My grandmother very softly said, "Oh, good Lord." The waiter came over with a pen. He was a kid, 20 maybe, with a name tag that said Caleb. He had clearly heard everything. He set the pen down next to my plate without saying a word and walked away faster than waiters usually walk. I signed it. Right there. I signed my full legal name with my middle name spelled correctly in the witness line at the bottom of the second page. I dated it. I slid the paper back to the center of the table on top of the breadbasket. "There," I said. Thank you so much. Truly. I mean that. My mother's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. You don't have to be sarcastic. I'm not being sarcastic, I said. I'm being grateful. You've just saved me a very awkward conversation I was going to have on Sunday. What conversation? My sister said. The phone was still up, but her hand was shaking now, which was making the footage useless, which I knew she would discover later. Doesn't matter, I said. Not anymore. You've taken care of it for me. I stood up. I picked up my purse. I picked up the envelope, including the signed papers, because I wanted my own copy. I leaned over and kissed my grandmother on the top of her head. She smelled like the same lavender soap she had smelled like since I was 4. She reached up and held my wrist for a second and said very quietly into my forearm, "Call me Tuesday." That was all she said. I walked out of the steakhouse without paying, which I want to acknowledge was petty, because the reservation was in my mother's name and I had been planning to insist on the check, and I will admit that walking out and leaving them to settle it gave me a quiet, juvenile pleasure that I do not regret to this day. I drove home and I sat on my apartment floor and I did not cry. I was waiting for the crying. It didn't come. What came instead was a calm, focused clarity, the kind I usually only got at 3 in the morning during a hard product sprint. I scanned the Disownment papers on my phone. I emailed them to my attorney with a one-line note that said, "Please file these somewhere I can find them again." Then I poured myself a glass of the cheap Prosecco I had bought for myself that morning, before I'd known I would need it for any other reason, and I drank it standing at my kitchen counter. I thought my family had given me their worst that night. I was wrong. The worst was still 6 days away. But I want to talk about the 6 days first, because they matter. The morning after the dinner, my sister posted the video. Not the whole video. She had edited it. She had cut out the part where my mother handed me the envelope and the part where I asked for the pen. What she'd kept was a 15-second clip of me reading the papers, and the moment I started laughing and then a cut to my face as I stood up to leave. She had captioned it, "When you finally cut a toxic family member loose. Sometimes love is a boundary." She had set it to a sad piano cover of a pop song. It got 40,000 views in a day. Her friends from college, women I had grown up around, women who had once been to my high school graduation party, flooded the comments with hearts and praying hands emojis and long messages about how brave she was. 3 of them tagged me by name, as the toxic family member. I screenshot all of it. I sent it to my attorney too. He wrote back in 20 minutes and said, "Defamation is a stretch, but we can absolutely send a letter." I told him to wait. The second day, my mother called me 11 times. The first 3 calls were apologies. The next 3 were explanations. The next 3 were demands. The last 2 were threats. She left voicemails on all of them, which I want to point out was generous of her, evidentiarily speaking. The third day, my father sent me a single email. The subject line was practical matters. The body was a list of items in their house that he wanted me to come pick up by the end of the month, or he would, quote, donate them. The list included a quilt my grandmother had made for me when I was 8, 3 boxes of my college textbooks, and a small painting I had bought myself in Charleston when I was 19 with my first paycheck. I forwarded that one to my attorney too. He wrote back, "Now we have a letter." The 4th day, my brother-in-law messaged me on a platform I didn't even know he had my handle on. He said, "I want you to know I signed because she made me. I'm sorry. Please don't tell her I said this." I did not respond. I did, however, save the message. The 5th day, my grandmother called. She said, "I am 90 years old and I have known your mother her whole life, and I am telling you something now, and I want you to listen." I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "That woman has been jealous of you since you were 11. I don't know why. I never figured it out, but I know it when I see it, and I have seen it in her since you were 11. Don't you dare let her take this week from you. You hear me?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Good. I'm sending you a check. Don't argue." I said, "Yes, ma'am." She hung up. The 6th day was Friday. On Friday morning, I was scheduled to give the keynote at the Regional Supply Chain Conference in downtown Charleston. The conference was hosted every year by the Charleston Chamber of Commerce in partnership with the parent company that had just acquired us. It was the largest business event in the city, 900 attendees. The mayor opened it. The governor's deputy did the keynote on the second day. I was the keynote on day one. I was being introduced to the industry, formally in my new role. The CEO of the parent company, a woman in her 50s who had become a real mentor to me over the previous 9 months of due diligence, was flying in from Atlanta to do the introduction. She had asked me, 2 weeks earlier, who I wanted in the front row. I had given her a list of 4 people: my 2 co-founders, my attorney, my grandmother. I had not put my parents on the list. I had not put my sister on the list. I had not at any point told any of them that the conference was happening. But Charleston is a small city, in the way that all cities are small if you live in them long enough. And the Chamber of Commerce, the week before the event, had sent out its standard invitation list: premium tickets, $200 a head. The email had gone, among other places, to every local business of a certain size, including the dental practice my sister co-owned with 2 partners. She had bought tickets, for her and for my mother and for my father. She had bought them, I would later learn, because the email had said the keynote was a rising voice in regional logistics, and she thought it would be a useful networking event. She had not read the speaker name. She had not, evidently, recognized my name on the email when she had glanced at it. I want you to understand that I did not know they were going to be there. I had not planned this. I am telling you that because the part that comes next looks staged, and it was not. Some things in life arrange themselves, and the only thing you can do is not interrupt. I arrived at the convention center at 7:30. I was wearing a suit I had bought the week before. Navy with a faint stripe, the first piece of clothing in my entire life that had cost more than $300. My grandmother was already there. She was sitting in the front row in a wheelchair my co-founders had arranged for her, holding a paper cup of coffee with both hands, and when she saw me come in through the side door, she lifted the cup an inch in salute. The CEO came over. She hugged me. She said, "Are you ready?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I'm going to do a long intro. I want to. Is that okay?" I said yes. The room filled up. 900 people. The lights dimmed. I stood in the wings. I saw my parents from the wings. They were in the 8th row on the aisle. My sister was next to them in a cream-colored blazer, her phone already out. Because she filmed everything now, it was a reflex. They had not seen me yet. They were looking at their programs. I watched my father unfold his program and read the front of it. I watched his face change. I watched him lean over and say something to my mother. I watched her look at the program. I watched her look up at the stage. I watched her start to scan the wings. The CEO walked out. The applause started. She thanked the chamber. She thanked the sponsors. She thanked the city. And then she said, and I am quoting from the recording, which I have watched exactly twice and do not need to watch again. 3 years ago, a woman walked into our offices in Atlanta with a pitch deck, 2 co-founders, and a model that was so clearly correct that I spent the entire meeting trying to figure out why nobody else had built it. The answer, it turned out, was that nobody else was her. It is my profound personal pleasure and the strategic privilege of our company to introduce to you today our new Senior Vice President of Network Strategy, the founder of what is now our flagship optimization division, a graduate as of last weekend of the Executive MBA program at our own beloved local university, and one of the smartest operators I have ever had the honor of working with. Please welcome to the stage. And then she said my name, my full name. My full, correct name, including my middle name, which was the one my parents had misspelled on the Disownment papers 6 days earlier. I walked out. I want to tell you what I saw, because it is the only image from that week that I have allowed myself to keep on purpose. My grandmother was standing up. She was 90 years old, and she was standing up out of the wheelchair, holding the armrest with one hand. And she was clapping with her free hand against her own thigh because she could not get her hands together. She was the first person on her feet. She started the standing ovation. The whole front row stood up because she did. The whole room stood up because the front row did. 900 people on their feet, before I had said a single word. My mother was not standing. My mother was sitting in the 8th row on the aisle with her hand over her mouth. My father was sitting next to her. He was holding the program in both hands and staring at it, the way he had stared at the water glass of the steakhouse. But his hands were shaking now, which they had not been at the steakhouse. My sister's phone was in her lap, not up, in her lap. She was looking at me. She was looking at me the way you look at a house you used to live in and just realized has been sold. I gave the keynote. It was 38 minutes long. I do not remember most of it. I remember 3 things. I remember making a joke about pallet utilization that got a laugh I had not expected. I remember pointing at my grandmother in the front row and thanking her by name, and the room applauding her, and her shaking her head, no but smiling so hard her eyes disappeared. And I remember, near the end, looking out at the 8th row and seeing that all 3 seats were empty. They had left. At some point during the keynote, my mother and father and sister had stood up and walked out of the convention center. They had not waited to see the end. The next 48 hours were the messiest of my adult life. My mother called 14 times on Friday afternoon. I did not answer. She left voicemails ranging from, "We had no idea, sweetheart. Why didn't you tell us? This is wonderful," to, "You have humiliated this family in public and you will regret it." She sent both kinds within the same hour. My father did not call. He sent one text which read, "Your mother is very upset. Please call her." That was it. That was the entire text. My sister did something stranger. She did not call. She did not text. What she did was take down the Disownment video. She also took down the posts she had made about it, and the follow-up post, and 1.5 years of other posts. Going back, in which she had referenced me by descriptors like my problem sibling and a relative I'm working on letting go of. She scrubbed her entire feed. She did this on Friday night between 8 and 10 p.m., which I know because 3 different friends sent me before and after screenshots within 20 minutes of each other. By Saturday morning, half the women who had commented "praying for you" on the original Disownment video had unfollowed her. Charleston, as I said, is a small city. The supply chain conference was, by Saturday, the most discussed business event in town. My sister's friends had been at the conference. Their husbands had been at the conference. The dentist who shared her practice had been at the conference. They had all watched the CEO of a publicly traded company stand on a stage and call my name. And then, 3 days later, they had remembered the video my sister had captioned, "Sometimes love is a boundary," and they had done the math. On Saturday afternoon, my brother-in-law called me. Not messaged. Called. He said, "I want you to know I'm leaving her." I said, "That's between you and her." He said, "I just wanted you to know." I said, "Okay." I hung up. I do not know if he actually left her. I have not asked. On Sunday, my mother showed up at my apartment. She had a casserole dish. She was wearing the pearls. She was crying, although I noticed, with the small cold part of myself that notices things, that her mascara had not run. She said, "I think we need to talk about Friday. I think there's been a misunderstanding." I did not let her in. I stood in the doorway of my studio above the dry cleaner, in a t-shirt and sweatpants and bare feet, and I said, "Mom, I have a copy of the document. You signed it. Dad signed it. Madison signed it. The notary signed it. I signed it. There is no misunderstanding. There is a piece of paper in my attorney's office that says we are not related. That paper was your idea. I want you to go home." She said, "We didn't mean it the way it sounded." I said, "It was a notarized document. There's only one way it sounds." She said, "We're family." I said, "From all of us." That's what you said. "From all of us." You said it twice. She said, "Sweetheart." I said, "Goodbye." I closed the door. I locked it. I went back to my couch. I sat down. I picked up my laptop. I opened a financial model I had been working on for the upcoming quarter, and I worked on it for 4 hours, and I did not cry then either. I want to skip ahead now because the rest of it is less interesting than people think. It has been 3 years. I bought a house, not in the suburbs, downtown, in a neighborhood my father once called the wrong side of every river, which has since become the part of town where you have to make reservations a month out for brunch. My grandmother lives with me now. She moved in 8 months ago after a fall. She has her own wing. She has a garden. She has a small terrier named after Roosevelt, which one I will not say because it embarrasses her. She is 93. She is, I think, the happiest she has been in 40 years. I do not speak to my parents. I do not speak to my sister. The Disownment papers, the real ones, the ones they signed, are framed on the wall of my home office. I had them matted. The frame is brass. My grandmother helped me pick it out. She said, and I quote, "Make sure it's a nice one. You earned it." My company, the division I run, did $340 million in revenue last year. We are projected to do over $500 million this year. I sit on 3 boards. I have given the keynote at that same Charleston conference twice more, and the second time, when I walked out on stage, the standing ovation started before the CEO had finished saying my name. My mother sent a Christmas card the first year. It came back because I had moved and I had not given her my new address, and I never will. She sent one the second year to my office, which is harder to hide. I did not open it. My assistant, who knows the entire story, walked it to the shredder herself. She said it gave her a small, pure joy. She is possibly the best hire I have ever made. My sister's marriage did not survive. I know this because Charleston is a small city. I do not know the details and I have not asked. I have a niece and a nephew I have not seen since they were 3 and 5 years old. And I think about them sometimes, and that is the only part of any of this that still hurts. My grandmother says they will find me when they're grown. She says it like it is a fact and not a wish, and I have decided to believe her because she has been right about every important thing in my life since I was born. People ask me, when they hear the story, whether I would do anything differently. They mean, I think, would I forgive? Would I reach out? Would I take the call? The answer is no. I want to be honest about why, because I think the honest answer is the useful one. The answer is not that I am angry. The answer is not that I am bitter. The answer is that my parents, on a Saturday in May 3 years ago, in front of a waiter and a grandmother and a sister with a phone, told me in writing exactly who they were, and then they signed it, and then they had it notarized. And then they handed it to me, on the day I had paid for myself to graduate, as a gift. A gift, my mother said, of clarity. And I have decided, after some thought, that I am going to take her at her word. It was the most useful thing she ever gave me. I have thought about that gray envelope for 3 years now, and I still come back to the same conclusion every time. My mother did not destroy me that night. My mother revealed me to myself. There is a difference, and the difference is the entire lesson. The thing nobody tells you about being the family disappointment is that the role is a kind of armor. As long as I was the one being judged, I was also the one being underestimated. Every Christmas dinner where my sister Margot showed off her pediatric practice, every Sunday brunch where my mother Celeste sighed at my career choices, every silent ride home from a holiday I had not wanted to attend, I was being told I was small. And while they were telling me I was small, I was quietly building something that was not. I did not build the company out of spite. I built it because I was good at the work and because the work made sense to me. But I will tell you this honestly. The fact that my family did not believe in me made it easier to keep my head down. Their contempt was, in a strange way, a gift I did not know I was receiving. The papers they handed me were the cause, the keynote was the effect. But the chain of cause and effect did not begin in that restaurant. It began the first time I decided not to argue with my mother about who I was. It began the first time I chose to put my energy into proving something to myself instead of proving something to her. Every quiet morning at the co-working space, every sleepless night before a client pitch, every conversation with my co-founders that I did not bring home to the dinner table was a small deposit into an account my family did not know I had. What I learned sitting on my apartment floor that night with the Prosecco going flat is that decency is not the same as obligation. I owed my parents nothing. I had owed them nothing for years, but I owed myself everything. I owed myself the work. I owed myself the long view. I owed myself the discipline to keep building when no one was watching because the people who were supposed to be watching had decided I wasn't worth the seat. If you are listening to this and someone in your life has handed you their version of a gray envelope, I want you to hear me. Do not waste your strength trying to change their minds. Use it on the work. Use it on the patient, ordinary, unglamorous building of a life they did not give you permission to want. Be honest about who they are. Be honest about who they are. Be honest about who you are. And then put your head down and become the person your 18-year-old self deserved. Grandma Ruth told me once that the people who love you make you taller. Everyone else is just weather. I think about that almost every day. The weather passed, the work remained. And the woman who walked onto that stage was not built by the people who tried to disown her. She was built by the woman she chose to be when nobody was clapping yet.